Ooh, ice spikes from Vorkath. Dangerous. Too bad I'm out of range. Oh, Zemouregal's about to bone spike me. Good try, but no. I'm still in death swiftness. Hi everyone, to all my rangers out there. As you saw, a 9 attack range weapon can outrange Vorkath's ice spikes, basically ignoring it completely. I decided to incorporate this strategy into this solo range guide on hard mode Vorkath. I will call this the long range strategy. Disclaimer, while it will make the killing easier, this is still not an easy boss. There's a lot of dangerous mechanics that can still get you killed. I will assume you have at least some decent gear. For those of you who have seen my Vorkath videos on my channel, my DPS isn't the most optimal. This guy will primarily focus on using the long range strategy and the mechanics rather than DPS rotations. Whether you have good DPS or not, you can still use this long range strategy, even in normal mode. Anyways, I'm going to break down this guide into multiple sections. The first section, I'm going to be discussing like preparations before fighting the boss and things that I recommend you have before you proceed. The second one is the long range strategy itself, and I'm going to go into detail how it works. And then I'm going to divide the bosses into different phases. Let's start with preparations. Starting with Zemouregal, he is just a disgusting, annoying Zemouregian majorate pest, so nothing special about his weaknesses. He does have a lower hit chance when fighting him though, so you can try Blackstone arrows to weaken him. Vorkath is an undead dragon, though it's an anomaly to begin with because there are some things that work on Vorkath and some things that do not. Poison does not work, Undead Slayer perk works, Salve Amulet works, Undead Slayer Sigil works, but Dragon Slayer perk does not work, and neither does Dragon Slayer Sigil. But Jazz Dragonbait Arrows works, and so does Dragon Slayer Task and Undead Slayer Task. I do recommend Dragon Slayer Task over the Undead because the Undead minions will complete the Undead task faster. Both of them will work regardless. And there are other boosts that can help you, and I strongly recommend, or just because I use them myself. We have Super Anti-Fire, which reduces Vorkath's Dragon Breath damage. Powder of Protection that adds another 10% damage reduction when you're using the Self Amulet. Thermal Bath from the Spa for extra HP. Desert Pantheon Aura for the extra HP. If you don't have that, you can use the Bonfire. Darkness for the dodge chance against minions and Vorkath. Death Ward Relic for that extra damage reduction. Disruption Shield for extra damage blocking. And there is a niche effect of Poison Purge supposedly working on pink poos, but I don't recommend it. Venom Blood and Anti-Poison doesn't work. If this is your first time doing hard mode Vorkath, or you are struggling to survive, I would tell you to bring a mammoth with scrolls. The scrolls will eat food from your pack mammoth without consuming adrenaline. Even though it's lower DPS, I would say there's no shame in bringing one if you are learning. Once you are comfortable and get the feel for the boss, you can try to see if you can bring a Blood Reaver with scrolls instead, which is what I recommend. I did try Hellhound, but I found the damage from it was lower than the Blood Reaver and it didn't help with surviving. You're welcome to try it if all else doesn't work. For this long range strategy to work, you need to have a two-handed ranged weapon that has 9 attack range. As for arrows, I recommend Jazz Dragonbait arrows on Vorkath, 1 arrows for the Crying Zemouregian, Blackstone arrows to increase your accuracy against the Zemouregian, Nesmore arrows for incendiary shot. This is my setup. You don't have to follow it completely if it's not in your budget or you have something better. Many of the main things I listed in this video already are the main ones. There are some few things you can do to change this. I know blue blubbers are a popular choice simply because they don't drain adrenaline. I don't use it personally because sometimes they just don't heal fast enough against the Zemouregian. You're welcome to bring them if you are more comfortable with it. Otherwise, you can stick with food like sailfish, especially if you are bringing a mammoth with scrolls. You could try Gut Express instead of Cerebrus. They just heal less, but at least they don't drain stats. The essence of finality here I have are the Serengabo. These two here are the Ceradoma Bow and Gut Exposed specs for the extra healing. They were more experimental, but I actually like them here. They are not required, but I have done kills without them before. I actually covered a video about these two specs if you want to check that out. If you don't want to use them or prefer more DPS EOFs, you're welcome to bring them. You can just settle with self-aiming and SGB EOF if you have one. The Blood Reaver pouch here is because it's faster for me to summon a new Reaver instead of trying to figure out Spellbook Swap or Prism. If you are capable of doing Spellbook Swap, you can just do that instead of an extra Reaver pouch. You can also bring in a Hydrix boss from an Eldritch Crossbow if you are comfortable doing that. Grimoire instead of Jazz if you're willing to spend lots of GP on that. Last but not least, I am bringing an Inspiration Aura which helps with Adrenaline. You're welcome to try other DPS auras, but I will recommend Mandarin Aura instead because Reckless is a dangerous one, especially if you're learning. The long range strategy. The long-range strategy, as previously shown, relies heavily on being out of range of Vorkath's ice spikes to avoid having to deal with it completely. It also incorporates the strategy of remaining inside the Death Swiftness when Zemouregal's bone spikes comes up. I will be explaining this with the assumption that the compass is facing east towards Vorkath. Pay close attention to these rocks when you enter the arena. These rocks are what guide me to know if I am safe or not. As long as I am standing behind these rocks, I am out of range from the ice spikes. The one thing to keep in mind is our character tends to run an extra tile ahead, so be mindful when you're running to attack Vorkath, especially in the event your position gets compromised by poison pools. It's probably a good idea to take a step back just to see if you're in range. The second part is to make sure to stand on the right side or south of the swiftness, and when Zemouregal's bone spike pops up, you move to the left or north. I have experimented many Death Swiftness placements, and it seems I have the best results in staying in Death Swiftness if I place it around this center line here. Don't worry if you don't get it right the first time, but once you figure it out, it just feels so nice to not have to deal with ice spikes when there's too many other things to worry about. Phase 1 and 2. Now it's time to begin the phases. I know I didn't really explain the mechanics of the boss, but the focus of the next section is to explain as we go by. Let's begin the kill, shall we? Okay, we started the instance and we're bombarded with a bunch of stuff on the screen already. Let's take a step back and I'll explain what we're looking at. We have our two bosses positioned here. For this phase, we ignore the Zemouregan past and only target Vorkath. The rocks are over here. We have an extra action button. When using it, a ballista will be fired from Vorkath that deals 10k range damage to all enemies here. The green bar is Vorkath's HP, the blue bar is Zemouregal's HP. We have a power bar here. By default, this will be 75% and it will increase by 25% each phase with a maximum power of 125%. The power bar increases the damage Vorkath deals to you. And these yellow arrows indicates the transition from one phase to another. In the beginning, you can choose to either play Soul Split or play Deflect Necromancy, whichever one you are more comfortable with. Now we have our first mechanic. Vorkath will use Dragon Breath, which is not protected by prayer. It is reduced by Super Anti-Fire and the damage does get boosted by the power bar. What I like to do is use Disruption Shield. However, Zemouregal usually auto-attacks you around the same time, so if you like to play with the timing, you can, or you can just block one of them. There is a chance that the Dragon Breath will miss, which is what happened here. If you don't have Disruption Shield, you can use Resonance. We now have our second mechanic. If you can notice in the back, a minion spawned and is slowly walking towards Vorkath. Minions will always spawn after Vorkath's Dragon Breath, so it's important to save your ballista. There are minions that will attack you that spawn, and there is at least one support minion that will spawn. The support minion can be either of these three. A ghost healer that heals Vorkath by 1k, an empowering zombie that adds 50% to Vorkath's power bar when he reaches Vorkath, and a skeletal shielder which reduces the damage down to Vorkath by 25% per shielder. The empowering zombie and the skeletal shields are the ideal ones that needs to be shot by a ballista. Right after Vorkath's Dragon Breath, prepare to fire the ballista. Bombs away! Now, depending on your DPS, there are two common outcomes from this phase. The first outcome is if you can do enough damage to skip the first Ice Spike phase. The second outcome is when you're not able to do enough damage to skip the first Ice Spike phase. I will go through both outcomes for this section. In this case, I managed to skip the Ice Spikes mechanics completely, which means there's no reason to use the long range strategy for the first two phases. You can just surge right in and blast Vorkath. To show you the second outcome, I decided to turn off my pocket item to show you what you should do. Turned out even with Jazz Book off, I still did too much damage, so I attacked the minion. In your case, you should keep attacking Vorkath, and this is where the long range strategy shines. However, in the first two phases, Zemouregal will stun you after the bone spikes, so have anticipation or freedom ready when you see the bone spikes. After this, if you do not phase Vorkath will use Poison Pool and certain parts of the fight will be covered in venom. Do not stand in them or you will take lots of damage. Returning to the original fight, the mechanic order will repeat. Dragon Breath, a minion spawns after Dragon Breath, then Ice Spikes, and then Poison Pools. At some point, you will notice Zemouregal is buffing Vorkath as shown here. Every time Vorkath attacks you, Zemouregal's damage is increased by 1% per stack. One important thing is to try to not spam Ballista. It is safe to fire the Ballista until Vorkath thinks about turning around to attack Zemouregal when you reach 656k HP. Sometimes I like to risk and fire another Ballista just before 756k HP. As long as you fire it before Vorkath turns and fires a Dragon Breath at the Zemouregal, you have enough time to fire it in phase 3, which I will explain soon. However, if you're still learning, I would not risk firing the Ballista. After the second breath at 756 HP, we have cleared the first two phases, which I would say is the easiest part of this boss fight. Phase 3. As we now transition into Phase 3, at this point, I stopped using Soul Split and switched to Deflect Necro. Vorkath will now fly away after a few auto attacks. So this is the part where you need to use the Ballista to shoot Vorkath down. If you do not accomplish this, the whole area will be covered in ice. Your familiar will suffer a lot of agony. You will die if you do not block it. You can try to block it using Deflect Magic Devotion or Barricade, or do what I do, Teleaway. It's not worth it. If you did fire the Ballista before Vorkath's Dragon Breath attack on Zemouregal, you should have enough time to fire it again before the attack. At this point, I personally like to spend time here to build up for a Deathsport Incendiary shot since I have time. You should also kill any support minions that spawns, and ideally I should smoke cloud the Zemouregal, but I have a tendency to forget. When Vorkath returns, do not rush towards the rocks right away, because Zemouregal will start with bone spikes. I also like to use Devotion here because it buys me time to see what's going on. Remember to one bomb Vorkath too, and then head for the rocks. Let's take a step back, because this is the most dangerous part of the fight, where you'll be taking lots of incoming damage. The usual stuff from the previous phases still apply. Unfortunately, depending on how fast you enter Phase 3, there will be some variations in mechanics like bone spikes. Most importantly, if you notice, Zemouregal now starts saving up residual souls for a Volley of Souls. He will also start using Finger of Death, Death Skulls, and Blood Siphon. In my opinion, the most threatening skills that can kill you is Finger of Death and Volley of Souls. Death Skulls won't bounce if you are standing far away. Blood Siphon takes time, and sometimes minions will run towards Zemouregal during this. You can definitely try to resonance this if you time it well, otherwise just make sure you got enough health for it. Unfortunately for us, Finger of Death lacks a telegraph, so if you see he has 2 residual souls, expect Zemouregal to start blasting you, so keep an eye on him after the Dragon Breath. I have noticed 2 variants of Zemouregal's attack pattern. He sometimes chooses between Blood Siphon and Finger of Death. Both of them will hurt, but Finger of Death is less predictable. Make sure you have enough HP for it because it's coming. If he Blood Siphons you, expect the Finger of Death to come right after a few auto attacks. If he Fingers of Death you first, expect a Blood Siphon right after a few auto attacks. After both, he will then use a Death Skull, finish up with Volley of Souls, and then he won't be using any of them for a while until he has at least 2 residual souls, which I'll show you later. This buff on Zemouregal will become more dangerous. This is now a test of DPS and endurance. You better take out Vorkath soon. If not, expect to eat a lot, especially when Zemouregal's attack pattern begins. Continuing the fight, I do my usual disruption shield on the Dragon Breath and hope I timed it well. Then I make sure to remember a ballista cause a minion spawns after Dragon Breath. So now I notice Zemouregal is using a Blood Siphon, so I figured he's gonna use a Finger of Death next. With Vorkath down, I consider this post phase 3. Well, there's the poorly timed Finger of Death because his hands are still in the air. Now he throws a Death Skull, so I know Volley of Souls is coming next. After the first Volley of Souls, I expect him to start Blood Siphoning at 2 residual stacks, but that won't happen in this kill. Remember the center line and stand on the south side of that swiftness. Yes, I forgot to do that here. So now he won't be using any mechanics for a while until he has at least 2 residual souls, so most of the damage is coming from auto attacks and minions. So I'm going to be testing how long it takes for him to Blood Siphon after Volley of Souls. And something I noticed when reviewing this clip is that I was constantly running around the map and I realized I skipped Finger of Death, maybe because of all the running, and then I saw Death Skulls and then Volley of Souls. Closing thoughts. Now that the Zemouregian is trapped in the rat hole, there are a few things I wanted to mention. First being about this strategy during duels. Unfortunately in duels, this is a little more difficult to do if you're basing both Vorkath and Zemouregal. Getting out of range might cause Zemouregal to anger the DPS, which is even worse. I would say this strategy is less effective at the beginning of the fight, but still very effective in phase 3 when Vorkath returns. What I like about this is taking advantage of the range difference really helps a lot. Reminds me of the time when I did Slayer, where I take advantage of my range to kill certain Slayer creatures. Since I am so stubborn that I only like to use bows and arrows, even in Slayer. But it also reminds me of some bosses like Sanctum Guardian, Ambassador, Seryu. The range bonus is just really nice.
Why do this? This is super complicated. Just use Necro, do good DPS, and skip mechanic.
What if you just wanted to use a different style, don't care about meta, or just do something different? That's what this is for.
She still needs to learn proper range rotation and stop doing things by instinct.
How many more times are you gonna tell her to learn proper range rotation? Okay, I heard enough. Both of you, go away. Anyways, this is my first actual guide for a boss. I hope some parts of it helps at least. You could probably even add a few extra strategies here and there. Thanks for watching. I also post other content related to bossing and ranged, as well as fashion scheme. Subscribe and bye. Oh, if you want to see a full kill of this strategy, here you go. Okay, thanks. Bye bye.